Welcome to this explainer. Today we're embarking on a pretty epic journey. We're going to trace the evolution of a language that honestly is so much more than just a way to communicate. It's the very cultural identity for hundreds of millions of people. We're going to explore how Hindi grew out of some seriously ancient roots, how it was forged into a complex constitutional framework, and how its literature evolved over centuries to capture the very soul of a nation.
All right, let's just dive right into it. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the language's evolution, move into its constitutional status and script, and then we'll trace its massive literary history through the early, golden, and modern eras.
Section 1. Evolution of the language. The deep linguistic roots. You know, language doesn't just appear out of nowhere, right? It grows. It branches out like a massive ancient tree. Looking at the breakdown of India's language families, you really can't miss the sheer dominance of the Indo-European branch. I mean, it covers a massive 74% of the linguistic landscape, and it's actually from the Satem branch of this massive family tree that modern Hindi ultimately descends. It shares deep ancestral ties with languages spoken all across Europe and Asia.
Tracing the chronological descent here reveals a really fascinating trend. It's all about simplification. We start way back, around 2000 BCE with Vedic Sanskrit. This was an incredibly complex language. We're talking 14 different vowels used in ancient texts. But over time, the language sort of softened for everyday people. It flowed into Pali, which was the language of Buddhist teachings, and then into Prakrit, the language of Jainism. As the centuries rolled by, it kept evolving through stages like Apabhramsha and Avahata, gradually streamlining itself until it blossomed into modern Hindi.
Now that Apabhramsha phase we just mentioned, the word literally translates to broken or fallen. But actually, scratch that. It absolutely wasn't a decline. In reality, it was this incredibly fertile ground where modern regional languages sprouted up. Specific regional forms of Apabhramsha birthed 18 modern dialects across 5 distinct groups. To give you an idea, Shoraseni gave us Western Hindi and Rajasthani, Arda Magadhi gave us Eastern Hindi dialects like Awadhi, and Magadhi gave us Bihari dialects like Bhojpuri.
Okay, here's a piece of trivia that usually surprises people. The word Hindi itself, it isn't originally Indian. It actually has Persian origins. See, ancient Persians pronounced the S sound as an H. So the river Sindhu became Hindu, the land became Hind, and the language spoken there became Hindi. It's a really beautiful reminder that the identity of this language is complex and wonderfully blended.
Section 2. Constitutional status and script. Formatting a nation's voice.
So, flash forward to India's independence in 1947. The country faced an unprecedented challenge. How do you code this historically rich, massive, and incredibly diverse language into modern law? Well, this brings us to a very common myth we need to bust right now. Article 343 officially designates Hindi as the Rajbhasha, which strictly translates to the official language for government and administrative work. It is absolutely not the Rashtrabhasha, or national language. In fact, to respect the vast linguistic diversity of the country, the Indian Constitution deliberately doesn't grant the status of national language to any single language.
And this commitment to diversity is perfectly captured in the Constitution's 8th schedule. It is very much a living, breathing document. When the Constitution was first adopted, it recognized 14 major languages. But as the nation grew and different linguistic groups voiced their identities, the Constitution was amended time and time again. Today, it proudly recognizes 22 distinct languages, making room for the incredibly diverse voices across the subcontinent.
It also took a huge amount of practical nation building to get the script ready for the modern world. The traditional Devanagari script was, quite frankly, a nightmare to print. It took a massive collaborative effort to standardize it for the printing press. Freedom fighter Bal Gangadhar Tilak practically revolutionized publishing by designing a standardized 190-type font. The Savakar brothers systematized the vowels. Dr. Shyam Sundar Das introduced the Anuswar to dot to simplify those tricky nasal sounds, and Raja Shiva Prasad introduced the Nukta so they could accurately represent Persian and Arabic sounds. It was a true team effort.
Section 3. Tracing the literary history. Who wrote the story?
All right, before we look at the poetry itself, who do you think wrote the very first history of Hindi literature? Shockingly, it wasn't an Indian scholar. The very first attempt was actually by a French scholar named Garcin de Tassy. The only catch? He arranged all the poets alphabetically. That meant a 15th century poet could be sitting right next to a 19th century one. He basically wrote a literary telephone directory. It took an Irish scholar, George Grierson, to finally organize them chronologically. After that, Indian scholars like Hazari Prasad Dwivedi and Ramchandra Shukla finally took the reins, giving this structured history its authentic cultural and scientific context.
Section 4. Early and Golden Eras, from Swords to Salvation.
Think of Hindi literature as that massive tree we talked about earlier. The Adi Kal, or early era, forms those deep, deep roots. And man, it was a time of intense contrasts. On one side, you had this mystical, rebellious Siddha poetry written by commoners like Sadahapa, who were directly attacking societal hypocrisy and the caste system. But then, on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you had Raso literature. This gave us grand, sword-clashing epics of courtly valor and romance. The most famous example is Chanvar Dai's massive epic, the Prithviraj Raso. It's literally two totally different worlds, sharing the exact same era.
So what's really crucial here is how this shifts into the Golden Era, or Bhakti Kal. During a time of foreign invasions and immense social despair, literature became a tool for spiritual salvation. The era split into two massive branches of devotion. First, there was Nirgun, which worshipped a formless, universal God through knowledge and love, championed by saints like Kabir and Sufi poets like Jayasi. And then there was Sagun, which worshipped God with a specific form and avatar, like Rama and Krishna, famously led by heavyweights like Tulsidas and Surdas.
Now when we talk about formless devotion, we have to pause and talk about Kabir. He was an unlettered weaver. He famously declared that he had never touched ink, paper, or pen. Yet his raw genius and his ability to distill profound, complex philosophy into simple, piercing couplets was just unmatched. It led the scholar Hazari Prasad Dwivedi to aptly crown him the dictator of language. The language literally just bent to his will.
Over on the Sagun side, devotion with form, we see some truly revolutionary acts. Tulsidas deliberately bypassed the elite, scholarly Sanskrit language to write his massive epic, the Ramcharitmanas, in Awadhi. That was the language of the common people, which brought the story directly into everyday households. And then there's Surdas. Widely believed to have been blind since birth, he wrote in Braj Bhasha and visualized the childhood of Lord Krishna with such intense, vivid emotion that he became known as the undisputed emperor of Vatsalya Ras, or maternal love.
Section 5. The Modern Literary Awakening. The Mirror of Society.
As the centuries rolled on and a British Empire took hold, literature essentially left the royal courts and hit the streets. Sparked by the 1857 revolution and the advent of the printing press, the Bharatendu and Dwivedi eras transformed literature into an active weapon for freedom and social change. This is when modern Hindi journalism was born. Furthermore, a dialect known as Khari Boli, which is actually the direct ancestor of the standard Hindi we know today, was polished up and established as the definitive medium for both serious prose and grand epics.
Following all this structure came an absolute burst of emotion and nature worship known as Chayavad. It's essentially the Romantic era of Hindi poetry. Scholars categorize its diverse giants using this brilliant metaphor of the Hindu Trinity. Jaya Shankar Prasad is Brahma, the creator who seeded the movement. Sumitranandan Pant is Vishnu, the preserver who nurtured it with his beautiful nature poetry, and Suryakant Thrupanade Nirla is Mahash, the destroyer, who fiercely broke all the traditional rules of poetic meter to introduce free verse.
This artistic explosion then built into an entirely different philosophy called Halavad. Spearheaded by Harvansh Rai Bachchan, this was a profound exploration of life's fleeting nature. On the surface, his absolute masterpiece, Madhushala, seems to just be about a tavern and wine, but it's actually a deep, profound metaphor for celebrating transient joys. And he perfectly balanced that with the fierce, unyielding grit of struggle in poems like Agnipath.
While the poets were out exploring philosophy, modern prose writers were shifting the camera completely inward. Munshi Premchand, who is known as the Emperor of Novels, wrote Godon. He finally put the grinding poverty and struggle of the common Indian farmer on center stage. It became the defining epic of rural India. Meanwhile, writers like Jayendra pioneered psychological realism. They weren't focused on what was happening in society outside. They were diving into the intense moral and psychological dilemmas inside the minds of their characters.
But as we trace this incredible timeline, a very poignant motif emerges. From the very first epic in the Adi Kal, Chand Bardai's Prithviraj Raso, right up to the modern era with Premchand's Mangal Sutra and Prasad's Iravati, so many of Hindi literature's absolute masterpieces share one thing in common. They were left unfinished by their authors, halted abruptly by death. Why does this exact pattern echo across 1,000 years of literary history?
Well, perhaps the answer is that literature, much like language itself, is never truly finished. It's a living, breathing reflection of a society's ongoing journey. An unfinished masterpiece isn't a failure, right? It's a profound reminder that the story of a culture is continuous. The pen is simply passed from one generation to the very next.